So today I wanted to do a quick multiplying and dividing a fraction quick review. One thing to remember is when you're multiplying or dividing fractions, you do not need the same denominator. Remember, you need the same denominators when you're adding or subtracting fractions, but not with multiplying and dividing. When you multiply fractions, it's super easy. You just multiply the numerators and then you multiply the denominators. You just have to make sure that you always reduce your fraction whenever it's possible to reduce. However, it is much smarter to cross cancel first before you multiply straight across in most cases. So that's good to know how to cross cancel because it can save you time. So here we've got 4/5 times 3/2. So once again, you simply just multiply the numerators together and multiply the denominators together and then see if it can be reduced. So 4 times 3 is 12 and 5 times 2 is 10. So that is an improper fraction, and it's okay to leave your answer as an improper fraction. However, if it's reducible, you must reduce. And notice that both 12 and 10 can be reduced or divided by 2. So if it's reducible, you must. So 12 divided by 2 is 6, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So there is your reduced improper fraction. If you want to change your improper fraction to a mixed number, that is okay too. Both are correct. Technically, you can even write your answer as a decimal. But the rule of thumb kind of in math is, if you're working with fractions, we really want you to leave your answer in fractions. So we need you to know how to work with fractions. How did I go from an improper to a mixed number? I divided 5 into 6. Goes one time. 1 times 5 is 5. Subtract, that gives you 1. So the denominator, and this is your whole number, and the remainder is your numerator. So that's how you go from an improper to a mixed number. Now remember, again, you could cross cancel first before you multiply. So when you're cross canceling, remember you can cross cancel and look for some, not cross multiply, but cross cancel. So you're looking for something in common between those two, or something in common between those two, and you can even cross cancel up and down as long as it's a numerator with a denominator. So notice that 2 can go into 4 and 2 can go into 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and then after we cross canceled, we can simply multiply the numerators, and then we can multiply the denominators. So that gives us 2 times 3 is 6, and 5 times 1 is 5. And notice we got the same answer that we got after we reduced here. So it just makes it easier when the numbers are bigger. So if the numbers are relatively small, I just multiply straight across and then reduce. But if the number's kind of big, then I'd look for cross canceling if it's possible. So here is a division problem. We're going to change the division to multiplication and reciprocate the second fraction. So we're going to leave the first fraction the same. We're going to change division to a multiplication problem, as long as we remember to take the reciprocal, or to reciprocate, which is really flipping the fraction to 7/4. We'd like you to use the word reciprocate instead of just using the word flip, and then we can multiply straight across because now it's a multiplication problem. So 2 times 7 is 14, 3 times 4 is 12, and then notice this fraction is reducible. You must always reduce your fractions if it's reducible. And notice that both the numerator and denominator are divided by, reducible by 2. So that gives us 7/6. And that is called an improper fraction. You can leave your answer as an improper fraction, but make sure it's always reduced. So notice this improper fraction was reducible. Or you can write this as 1 and 1/6 as its mixed number. To get to the mixed number, we're just dividing 6 goes into 7 one time. That's where this whole number came from. And then 1 times 6 is 6. That gives you 1 remainder, and that remainder is your numerator, and your denominator is 6. Typically, if the numbers that I'm multiplying are relatively small, I will typically just multiply straight across and then reduce at the end. However, if the numbers are a little bit bigger, I will try to use the cross-canceling technique. So notice I could have cross-canceled and reduced those two because they were both divisible by 2. So 2 goes into 2 once, 4 divided by 2 is twice, and then I could multiply straight across. And when I do that, I would get 1 times 7 is 7, 3 times 2 is 6. So notice I end up getting the same answer that I got when I reduced. So I didn't have to reduce at the end. So what if the fractions have signs, positive and negatives? You just have to know your sign rules. If they have the same sign, your answer is positive. If they have different signs, your answer is negative. So notice in example 1, we are multiplying a negative times another negative. So I already know my final answer is going to be a positive answer. Remember when you have a number next to a symbol or next to something and there's nothing between it, that implies multiplication. So I really just need to multiply 3/8 times 6/5. And if I multiply straight across and I multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators, that will give me 18 over 40. And then I need to reduce that fraction. When you're reducing, you really want to look for a number that will go in both the numerator and denominator that is the biggest number. They're both even, so I obviously know they can be reduced by 2. But what about 4? 4 goes into 40, but does 4 go into 18? No. 10 goes into 40, but does 10 go into 18? No. So really the biggest number that they're both divisible by is 2, so we're going to reduce by 2. And that will give us 9 over 20. 9 over 20 is called a proper fraction. So you cannot change a proper fraction to a mixed number because a mixed number has whole parts. And remember, it takes 20 out of 20 to make one whole number. And we're sitting at 9 out of 20. So it is not even close to being a whole number yet. Remember, 10 out of 20 is the halfway mark to getting to a whole number. So 9 out of 20 is a little bit less than a whole. So I know that this does not have any whole parts in it. So therefore, it is just a proper fraction that is reduced. Now remember, we could have gone back and cross-canceled first instead of multiplying straight across. So a lot of times it's smarter that if you can basically reduce first before you multiply straight across, that sometimes can really save you some time. So that gives us 3 times 3 gives us the 9, and 4 times 5 gives us the 20, and then we don't have these big numbers to try to reduce with. So it's usually smarter to try to cross-cancel first, which is basically reducing before you multiply straight across. What about number 2? In number 2, it's a division problem, but what about the signs? We're multiplying a negative times a positive. So we already know our answer is going to be a negative answer. So we can just go ahead and divide the 4/5 divided by the 2/10. So remember, we keep the first fraction the same. We change division to multiplication as long as we reciprocate or flip the second fraction. So that gives us 10 over 2. And if you want to multiply straight across, 4 times 10 is 40. 5 times 2 is 10. Remember, this also means divided by. Super important that you understand that 40 over 10 also means 40 divided by 10. You need to know both. So 40 divided by 10 is just 4. So I don't have to sit there and go, how do I reduce that? Oh, I can reduce by 10. And that gives me 4 over 1, which is 4. I can think of this as just a 40 divided by 10 problem. So having all of those tools in math can really help your math class go a lot smoother. So remember, our answer is really negative 4 as our final answer. Again, you could have cross-canceled, so let's look at what would have happened if you cross-canceled. So here's the original problem again. After we changed division, multiplication, and reciprocated, you could have noticed that, hey, these can be reduced by 5, and these two can be reduced by 2. So we're basically just reducing before we multiply straight across. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 10 divided by 5 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And then you can multiply straight across. 2 times 2 is 4. And 1 times 1 is 1. And remember, this is 4 divided by 1 equals 4. So in this problem, we're going to be working with a mixed number and a whole number. Remember, when you're multiplying or dividing by fractions, the first thing you want to do is get it to be a fraction times a fraction, or a fraction divided by a fraction. Right now we have a mixed number times a whole number, so we need to turn it into a fraction times a fraction. So we're going to take the mixed number 2 3/4 and change it into an improper fraction by multiplying 4 times 2 and then adding. When we do that, 4 times 2 is 8, plus 3 is 11/4. So we're going to convert this mixed number to its improper fraction equivalency, and we're going to change the whole number 6 to 6/1 because they're equivalent. Now let's have a little bit of background. Remember, this is your whole numbers. So remember what this means. You have 2 whole pizzas and you have 3/4. So we have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. So there's 2 3/4 right there in the picture. It's good to understand the picture understanding of fractions. When we're converting to 11/4, we're just taking all of the whole things, and we're basically cutting them up into fourths because that's what this denominator is. And so how many fourths do we have? If you count them, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 fourths. So that's really what we're doing when we're changing a mixed number, is we're just cutting up all the wholes into pieces so we can say how many pieces we have. Good, just a quick reminder, it's been a long time since you guys have worked with pictures and fractions. Good to know. Once you have it as a fraction times a fraction, then we can go ahead and multiply the numerators. 11 times 6 is 66, and 4 times 1 is 4, and we should always reduce, and that gives me 33/2. So my final answer, because I'm multiplying a positive times a negative, would be a negative 33/2, or you can write that as negative 16 1/2. Do you see how big the numbers got? So that's the reason why it's smart to know about how to cross cancel, which again is really just reducing before you multiply straight across. And I notice these are both divisible by 2. So 4 divided by 2, 6 divided by 2, and then multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. And that gives us 33/2. See, much faster. Now let's look at the division problem. Once again, a negative times a negative is a positive, so I know my answer is going to be positive. I'm going to rewrite this as a fraction divided by a fraction first by changing the mixed number into an improper by multiplying and adding. I'm going to ignore the negative. 3 times 1 is 3, 4, 5, so that gives me 5/3 divided by 10/1. Then we're going to keep the first fraction the same, change division to a multiplication problem, as long as we remember to reciprocate or flip the second fraction. I notice that these are both divisible by 5, and so that's going to give me 1 and 2 in those locations. Then I can multiply straight across, and that gives me 1/6. So my answer is 1/6. Again, I could have multiplied straight across. That wouldn't have been too bad. 5 times 1 is 5. 3 times 10 is 30. And then reduce both of these by 5, and I would have gotten to the answer 1/6 as well. Often in math, you have some whole numbers plus some fractions, and working with positive and negative numbers. And students seem to have difficulty with that, and I think that's because they forget what fractions really are and what they're about. So there's lots of ways you can do this, but a lot of times if you just understand the visual, you can get the answer. Notice that we're adding right? So we're adding, and don't we have a lot more positives than we do negatives? So I know my answer is going to be positive because I have more positives than negatives. So I already know that my sign is going to be a positive answer. So let's just think about this. I have to think of how many more positives. So I basically have to subtract those. Remember, this means you have 4 whole, let's just use pizzas as an example. Full whole pizzas. And you basically need to take away 2/3. So remember, the denominator is 3. That means you're breaking up the pizza into thirds. And we want to take away 2 of those thirds. So if we take these 2/3 out, doesn't that leave me 3 whole pizzas with 1/3 left over? So my answer is 3 and 1/3. See how much easier that was if you understand the visual picture? Let's look at number 3. Number 3, notice this time you have more negatives than you do positives. So I know my answer is going to be negative. Because the signs are different, I really need to take away. So I have 5 whole pizzas. I'm going to take away 1 whole pizza, and I'm also going to take away 1/6 of a pizza. So remember, since the denominator is 6, that means I need to break this up into 6 pieces, and I'm taking away 1 of those 6 pizzas. So remember, you don't have to draw the slices. Doesn't it take 6 to make 1 whole, right? And I'm taking away 1 of those 6 away. So I have 3 wholes and 5/6 left over. So it's -3 and 5/6. So you don't actually have to draw the 6 slices. We know that 6 out of 6 is a way to write 1 whole, and then we're taking 1 of those 6 away. And then number 2, we have the same sign, and because we have the same sign, we have negatives, plus we have more negatives, so we know our answer is going to be negative. Now don't get confused multiplying and dividing sign rules with adding and subtracting signs. So because I have the same sign, I'm actually going to add the 3 whole pizzas with 1/4, right? So I have three cups of flour plus another 1/4 cup of flour. So don't I end up with a -3 and 1/4 cups of flour. So that is your quick review of fractions. A suggestion might be to go back and copy the problems that I did, do them on a separate piece of paper, and then you could rewatch the video if you wanted to. I hope this quick review of fractions, of multiplying and dividing with a little bit of adding some easy ones in there, has helped you.